Before Sounders' release, I traveled across the country on a promotional tour with some of the other cast members. From San Francisco to Boston, Indianapolis to Richmond, reporters who previewed the film gathered to interview me about the production. It was during my stop in Philadelphia that the earth quaked. Among the group of reporters stood a Caucasian gentleman, auburn-haired and around age 30. He cleared his throat, lifted the microphone to his lips, and locked his gaze on me. "I have a confession to make," he said slowly, as if calculating the impact of what he would reveal. "I never thought of myself as being the least bit prejudiced," he said. "But as I watched the film, I just could not believe that the son was calling his father daddy. That is what my son calls me." Silence blanketed the room. "Well, child, I'll tell you." My mouth fell open like a broken pocketbook. As the man's words shuddered through me, I forced a smile. But all the while I was thinking, my Lord, how appalling. This man clearly knew nothing about our shared humanity. He had no understanding of God's multi-hued creation, of his place next to yours and mine in that colorful family mosaic. From his perspective, there had to be something radically wrong with a black child calling his father daddy, a term he thought reserved for his own kind. How could Nathan, once declared 3/5 human by our Constitution, be worthy of such endearment? How could a fraction of a man stand forehead to forehead with him? That would put Nathan on par with all those born into the privilege of whiteness as he had been. I don't know what stunned me more, the fact that the man believed what he did, or that he had the audacity to say it aloud. After a lengthy pause, I regained my composure and my tongue. "I have to congratulate you, sir," I said, my tone tinged with sarcasm. "It takes a lot of courage to stand up here in the midst of your peers and admit you never thought you were prejudiced until you saw the film. Thank you." I was so disturbed by what I heard that, in that moment, this was the only response I could muster. I left that press conference saying to myself, maybe it's just this one. Surely amid the shrill call for equality sounded during those years, there couldn't be many who shared this man's view. That is how I attempted to console myself. Yet as I continued touring the country, I became acquainted with an America I'd seldom encountered up to then. At the time, I considered myself fairly knowledgeable about this nation I've always called home. I'd grown up in New York and lived either there or in Los Angeles, two culturally progressive cities, but outside of that bubble, in the many towns and communities I regularly flew over, the seed of Dr. King's dream might have been sown, but it obviously had not germinated. During a stop in the Midwest, another reporter's comment reinforced that notion. I didn't know that black men and women had the kind of loving relationship that we see between Nathan and Rebecca, a young woman stated. Their connection didn't seem believable to me. I was so taken aback by her assessment that I did not respond. So seldom had black families been portrayed nurturing one another on screen that, when art indeed imitated life, the truth of that narrative was met with deep skepticism. Embedded in this woman's observation was an assumption that lives at the center of all bias. You are not like me. You are intrinsically different. And that difference deems you inferior. I recognize these comments for what they were, pure ignorance. Anger would have been the justified response, and for a time in private, I was certainly apoplectic. But, as life has taught me more than once, resentment corrodes the veins of the person who carries it. These reporters' beliefs, however offensive they may have been to me, were not a bitterness to be nursed. They were a lesson to be heeded. So rather than recoiling in exasperation at the ideas expressed, I leaned in and listened intently at every remaining tour stop. Much of what I heard mimicked what those two reporters had dared voice. And the more aware I became of the bigotry that existed against black people, what might have been reason to seethe became, for me, a reason to pursue my craft with new purpose. I returned home from the road, saying to myself, "Sister, you've got some educating to do." It was at this juncture that I made a conscious decision. I would use my profession as my platform, a stage from which to make my voice heard by carefully choosing my projects and portrayals. I could not afford the luxury of simply being an actress. Yes, I was already selecting only those roles that gave me goose pimples, just as Rebecca in Sounder had. But as an artist with the privilege of the spotlight, I felt an enormous responsibility to use that forum as a force for good, as a place from which to display the full spectrum of our humanity. My art had to both mirror the times and propel them forward. I was determined to do all I could to alter the narrative about black people, to change the way black women in particular were perceived by reflecting our dignity. When I made the choice to pursue acting, the last thing in the world I intended to be was an actress for the cause. Like most artists, I expected to continually hone my craft by playing all types of roles, with little consideration for how those portrayals might impact the cultural dialogue. But the racial climate called for something more of me. And while traveling this great land, I resolved to answer in the one way I knew how. Never once during the billowing smoke of the civil rights movement would I be spotted at a Woolworth lunch counter braving a sit-in while hate-mongers hurled spit and spite. Never would I parade up and down the boulevards of Selma or Montgomery, a picket sign thrust high alongside my shouts. I admire the valiant freedom fighters who took to the streets, but it wasn't in my makeup to demonstrate in these ways. Nonetheless, I was set on speaking in the only place I felt courageous enough to do so, on the stage. I protested, using not my own words, but those of the characters I inhabited. 50 years after I made a silent pact with myself to play women whose legacies uplift us, that vow still guides me. This life is something. When you've lived as long as I have, others always seem to be asking how you are. I'm here still. I'm fond of responding. God must have more work for me to do that I haven't yet done. Over nearly a century, I've witnessed the times shifting, even as I've watched them come swinging back around, full circle, to the moment we are standing in today. There is more of this glorious pilgrimage in my rearview mirror than there is up ahead. When I think now on the promise I made all those seasons ago, I recognize it as a defining moment, one from which scores of others would flow. And what preceded that pivot was a miracle that confounds me, that a reticent girl, born in the slums and bathed in the mighty timbre of a church organ, ever stumbled into such a grand arena.